evening, boys and ghouls. Once again, it is I, Kevin Tracy.
And I'm Samantha Tomlinson.
And welcome to...
And I'm still...
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Let's say I'm still not good at accents, so...
Well,
anyway.
Welcome to this week's spooky episode of Movie Reel, where we're still going through our history of horror. This year, we're stopping in 1954 with the classic movie Them by Warner Brothers Pictures.
Yeah, this movie, I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it way more than Nosferatu.
Well,
but,
you're comparing apples and oranges with these two movies.
Yeah, yes, but in terms, yes, I know, but in terms of just, I obviously am not really a horror person, but I definitely enjoyed it. It wasn't really scary. No. It was more like, it's kind of, there are stuff that I know for an audience member would be a jump scare, or I'm like, oh, this is kind of creepy, but it wasn't anything like really
overtly terrifying.
I wasn't like, no, it was like kind of that fun scare where you're a little bit in suspense, and like it wasn't like anxiety filled. Like it was nice.
This is definitely like the kind of movie that's just like this is just like a movie that's just fun to watch and just munch popcorn through it. It keeps you engaged enough to find the entertainment out of it, and it's a really interesting movie because this is definitely more of a cautionary tale rather than an actual horror movie, and it goes through this movie very methodically and is told in a very matter-of-fact way, because you're more or less going through like a police investigation through these various disappearances and murders and break-ins until we reach the conclusion of this impossible outcome of mutated ants that have been exposed to radiation from the original atomic testing in 1945 in New Mexico.
It is very methodical. Yes. Like very like I don't think I don't really think I've seen a ton of things that are done like this, where it goes through. I've noticed it more in like books when things are very like it's going like step by step on what the characters are doing. And it was kind of interesting to watch something like that. Especially because they're handling it. They weren't going insane or freaking out about what they know. They're like, okay, what do we know about ants? But there was a scene though when they was at the White House. They're at this meeting, and he's literally Dr. Medford is showing them a video on ants, and because of his accent, it literally just looked. It was just like you're watching a documentary on ants for like 2 minutes. Like that went on for a little bit too long.
For the 50s, like that was actually fairly standard of in terms of like giant like monster movies or monster movies that of something like mutated into something. That was actually a fairly standard scene to more or less like tell the audience the dangers of something that we consider to be like harmless or like fairly common to, well, if you like make this thing bigger and put it above the food chain, then this thing is terrifying. And that's actually like a fairly standard scene of just a scientist telling politicians the actual danger. And it was actually kind of funny because Dr. Medford Sr., the father, played by Edmund Gwenn, I didn't realize this, he plays Santa Claus in the original Miracle on 34th Street, and I didn't realize that until doing a bit of research on this movie.
And I want to bring up Peterson, who's the New Mexican
James
cop,
Whitmore,
who he's Brooks in Shawshank.
He is he?
And I came across, and I was like, huh. I was like, oh, that's funny. Because I thought he kind of looked. I think everybody in this looked familiar, but other than Medford and Peterson, none of them were in anything that I
Yeah.
knew of. But
So let's actually kind of focus on the cast a little bit. There was Robert Graham, who was the FBI agent who was introduced later on when Peterson lost his partner due to having to leave to call it in, and they brought him in to kind of figure this out because one of the earlier disappearances or deaths was an FBI agent. It's like, oh well, now they're involved. So Robert Graham is played by James Arnez, who is probably more known for his portrayal as the lead in the show Gunsmoke, which he was actually recommended for the role for that by John Wayne after seeing him in this movie. Yeah,
oh,
and there was also a very short scene with Leonard Nimoy where he's in this movie completely uncredited before he did anything Star Trek related as a like
yeah,
staff sergeant, like an army staff sergeant intelligence officer, where they're scouring through all the various news bulletins of anything that could be like connected to the missing ants that they're looking for. He's in the movie for like
I'm
a
looking for.
yeah,
Oh my god! I'm looking it up. Oh my gosh, that's him. That's
yeah, no,
crazy.
like I didn't recognize him like at all, and when I pointed that out to my dad, it's like, oh, that's him. It's like he didn't recognize him either. Um, and apparently there's also the main guy
Oh,
from IG.
Fez Parker.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The main guy from I Dream of Jeannie is also in a small uncredited role. I didn't see him in the movie,
Oh,
but yeah, there were several like fairly big name actors that had small roles in this, and this was just a
yeah,
really fun
yeah.
movie, and I really enjoyed the casting. I think my favorite character was probably Dr. Medford, and just some of the lines that he delivers are he kind of is a bit aloof in terms of like following like certain rules, like him in like the helicopter, like, oh, you need to stay over. It's like, well, she knows I'm done talking. Like he kind of acts
Yeah.
like a toddler at times, but then he delivers like lines of just like very serious importance that have like a lot of gravity to the situation, and he really brings a lot of seriousness and credibility to this through his role and his take on it, and I absolutely loved him in it.
I I liked him, and as well as his daughter, who's the other
Yeah,
doctor,
Pat,
and and there's a scene in particular that I really like the two of them because they find the like the ant hill,
the Mound. Yeah,
like they're yes, the mound, and they want to go down, and well they dropped something in there. They're hoping, obviously, they want to see who, if there any of the ants are dead or all of them are dead, because they're worried about the queen. They know a queen has. They're worried about the queen
yeah,
because if she flies off and lays eggs, that's bad. So they go there. They all want to go down, and uh, Robert Graham, who's the FBI agent, he doesn't want her to go down because he's like, no, there's no place for a woman, and she's like, no, you need me because you need a scientist down there. I can't explain to you. It's gonna be too hard for me to explain to you what we need you to look for. So just let me go. And uh, her father Medford is like, the thing is, he's saying, I didn't volunteer her. She wants to go, and as a scientist, I can't tell her not to go. And I really like that a lot because, of course, his concern comes more from being a
yeah,
father, but he's not going to stop her, not because of her gender, but just because of her occupation. He's like, no, yeah, you need her. She needs to go. And I appreciated that. I like that scene a lot because it's like, I thought it was interesting how uh he was kind of compartmentalizing his struggles as a parent as well as, well,
just
you know,
general
as she is a
safety. Yeah,
scientist. Yeah, she is a scientist. I can't tell her not to do this any more than I could tell any other colleague not to do this
yeah,
or not to do this. So yeah, I did like him a lot. I liked Pat. There wasn't really anybody in this to hate.
Not really,
There
no.
wasn't really any
There,
villain other
there
than
was no real human antagonist. Yeah, everyone pretty much just stuck to their roles, and yeah, I really enjoyed Pat's kind of sticking it to Robert Graham, because a lot of the times whenever there's like a female lead in this, they're usually just kind of sidelined to a romance subplot, and they kind of poke around
yes,
with that with like her and Robert Graham, but it doesn't really they don't focus on that a lot or really at all. There's just like a couple moments of like, oh, you worried about your father? It's like, oh, don't worry, like we'll figure this
yeah,
out. And it was just like a very few like spread out moments like that throughout the movie, but like them sharing like a glance, like, hey, you be careful out there. It's like, oh, don't worry, I will be. But
yeah.
it they don't focus on like them as a relationship. They focus on the problem first and them second. They're definitely like the side story that is kind of off to this. Yeah, it's off to the sides, and it's not really pursued more than it needs to be, which I really enjoyed. And a lot of movies kind of
I
focus on that more than it needs to be.
Oh yeah, and I totally agree, and I thought that as well as I saw that, but I kind of was wondering like, was it just they were giving making it very light flirtation and just had never attempted it to go more, or was it just that they planned to have it maybe go more and they just kind of didn't see it through? It seemed like it could have been either of the two, and I agree that because I feel like if this was made today, that would have been like a major
Oh,
side
absolutely,
story,
yeah.
or it would have been like a triangle between her, uh,
Ben and Robert,
Graham and yeah, Ben
yeah.
Peterson. So and I but also at first because when we first met her, and they do like make some like they do make a comment because
A woman
they weren't
doctor.
expecting a woman doctor, and they the only thing though that they do say is that like I hope she's the kind of doctor that treats sick people because I'll have the flu for her. Like that's the
Yeah.
only thing that they ever
Yeah,
say. They
it's like, oh, I'm
never
getting a fever. Yeah, that's literally like
that
the only kind of like passing remark that they kind of throw at her. The rest of the time, it's just them focusing on the ants and the very brief conversations that her and Robert have.
I was really impressed that it wasn't more.
Yeah,
I was very like it's it was really progressive, which is very refreshing for a '50s movie or any movie before like
yeah, because this came,
I know
yeah, because
yeah
this came out in 1954, and it was produced by Warner Brothers Pictures. And when this movie was initially pitched to them, they passed on it, and they only picked it up because Paramount Pictures wanted to pick it up. And the thing that kind of confuses me about this is because the year before, Warner Brothers produced the movie The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which is a very popular and very well done science fiction movie that kind of deals somewhat along the same themes as them. And I was actually kind of debating on whether or not I wanted to pick that over them, because they do kind of deal with like the dangers of like the atomic age of man and like man versus nature. Um, and that was like very well received, and it was the biggest movie that Warner Brothers made that whole year. So it was kind of confusing as to why they didn't want to try to repeat that success with another science fiction movie that kind of dealt with a lot of the same themes. Because they literally only picked this up to spite Paramount because they didn't want them like poaching their movie. Uh, and it was also really interesting because this movie was originally they were originally planning to shoot it in 3D. So that's why there's like a lot of close
yeah
up of the ants, and you see like the army firing their flamethrowers into the camera, which I don't know how they did that, but that seems really sketchy because like they don't have like a lot of the same technology that like we have today of like you can safely do that. Like I think they would actually have to fire it at a camera and like splice it out before it hits the camera.
So I read that too, and they had 3D back then.
Yeah. Oh no, that was a very big like gimmicky thing back then for B movies. And in the opening title, the title card is in red and blue. So I think that was supposed to be like jump out of the screen and be in
Yeah,
3D, because that's the only thing of color in the entire movie. The rest of the movie was shot in black and white. Um,
yeah. It was supposed to be shot in color, and then
yeah,
they
they scrapped
uh
that.
side yeah, and they just kept the title, which I kind of liked it being black and white.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't really, not that it would have really, I don't think made a difference if it was in color. But yeah, I had also read though that like but going back to the flamethrowers,
Yes.
that they were using actual military. I can't
Military
talk.
issued flamethrowers on loan from the
Yes,
U.S. military. Yes.
and all of the people that use them were veterans and had been trained and knew how to use them.
Yes.
So it was like,
Yeah,
oh, okay.
so James Whitmore, I actually looked this up. So James Whitmore, he was a lieutenant in the United States military, and I think he was discharged due to medical reasons in 46 or something like that, like near the end of World War II. But yeah, he was a lieutenant in the United States military around that time, so he was allowed to safely use a flamethrower as well as other military equipment that they did use for this movie. Because there was a lot of like military equipment, like they had various jeeps, they had helicopters, planes, on
Hmm.
loan from the U.S. military, and for the most part, yeah, that's also kind of standard. Like there was a lot of B-roll of like various like troops like mobilizing, and it just seemed like this was the movie that kind of like set that standard, because this and the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms kind of set the like atomic monster, like giant monster kind of craze. Definitely more so the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, because that was like directly influenced one of my favorite monster movies, Godzilla, which came out the year afterwards. Which not a lot of people remember that uh, the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms came out before Godzilla, and Godzilla is known as the king of the monsters. But there were monster movies that came out before it, but not that many people remember that.
Hmm. I So yeah, I this was my first time watching this movie, but I knew about it because when my sister was in like high school, I think she and my dad would occasionally they watched old movies more. It was kind of the equivalent of like me watching a bad movie today. They just looked at it as it was a bad movie because it was old,
Oh,
and
lame.
they so like they so like my sister, when I said we were doing this movie, she said, oh, just watch Ant-Man instead. And I'm like, what? And then she sent me like ant emojis and I'm like, spoiler, because you had me watch part of the trailer
Yeah,
and then was like, no, wait, stop, because it just spoils the entire
yeah, the
movie.
trailer I found straight up just shows like all like the major like action footage, and it, like pretty much just spoils like the entire climax of the movie in the trailer that I found. Which I'm not sure if that was like the original trailer they used for the movie when originally promoting the movie or not. But yeah, it pretty much just spoils like the entire thing, and I realized like halfway through, it was like, oh no, wait, I don't want her to know it's ants. Like I didn't realize that they were going to
Yeah.
show the monster, because you don't see the ants for like a good, like I want to say like 30 minutes into this movie, which I really enjoy, because they definitely focus on they definitely practice the principle of less is more for this movie. Um,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh
they
yeah.
use it spectacularly in this movie, in my opinion.
I think, yeah, the best. I think I guess, most air quotes scariest part of the movie is probably the beginning, just because you don't know what this is, and a lot of a lot of these people think their first thought is that there's some homicidal maniac out there,
Yeah, but
which I feel like is more terrifying to think of, that there's some homicidal maniac like running around the desert. Uh, but yeah, in the very very beginning, you have these two cops, so Peterson and what was his partner's name?
uh, oh, I'm drawing a blank, but yeah, it was
Peterson and his partner,
yeah.
and they're driving around. There's a helicopter. They're looking for the girl.
Well, they're just doing like a
Or
random
there's
like patrolling of the area, and their spotter plane just happens to find this little girl just wandering like aimlessly in the desert. And this was actually kind of a goof, because the little girl is briskly walking in a straight line and is only found 3 miles from where she escaped the trailer. And but it said that she escaped 10 to 12 hours earlier when the initial attack happened. So that would mean that she would have a walking speed of 0.25 to 0.3 miles per hour for her to make it that far.
I mean, she is, when they do find her, she's completely
Yeah,
unresponsive
she's in
and
shock.
doesn't barely blinks or doesn't blink. She won't yeah, she's in complete shock and terror. And so I can believe that she may be like she I really want to know how she escaped, because I'm how she survived that and no one in her family did
Well,
is crazy. But
I
not that like she, but like I'm just wondering
yeah.
how anyone could have escaped that.
So
And yeah.
I think they kind of alluded to that when Peterson is like examining the trailer, like the for starters, like the entire like door area is just caved out. Like the entire thing is just pulled to shreds. Like there's cabinets and debris everywhere. But when they're examining like the bedroom, it's relatively in a decent condition. And he checks like the cabinets underneath the windowsill, and he notices some fabric that has been torn off from her robe that she's wearing, and like a piece of like the head of her porcelain doll. So I think it that's just where she hid during the attack, and then she just kind of wandered out a little bit afterwards.
Oh, okay, because I can totally buy that maybe she was in so much shock that she just maybe was kind of frozen or didn't move at all
Yeah,
and then just got up and walked away. I mean, I don't know, but I can kind of, in terms of the timeline, I can totally believe that she was in so much shock that she probably just didn't move. I don't know. But
yeah,
yeah, that is they find her, she's completely unresponsive, and they this part I did think was a little, this is when it did start to get kind of creepy, was when they have other officers looking over her like campsite. It was a trailer,
yeah.
and they and there's one guy there who's trying. They find this weird footprint, and they're trying to make a cask out of it. And they hear um
The
they keep hearing the like calling, and it's the ants like calling
yeah,
to each other. And they're like, "What's that?" And then they hear it again. Is it the second time? And the girl like, and she's in the ambulance, and she like sits up, and
yeah.
they don't notice this. She sits up in like extra terror, and then just like lays back down.
Yeah.
And they're just like, "Huh, that's weird. What is
Oh,
that?"
must have been the wind.
And I'm like, that does seem creepy. And then they eventually discover that the owner of a nearby
General store.
shop,
Yeah.
yeah, he's also found dead, and his partner stays behind while Peterson goes to call it in, and then he hears that calling again, turns off his light, goes outside, and we just hear
Yeah, you
ah,
just hear him like
yeah.
shooting like 3 or 4 rounds before he just screams in pain. But going back to like that shrill kind of like calling that the movie does, they apparently used recording of like a tree frog that's found in like the southeast of the United States, and so that's a frog call apparently. I don't know if it's like a mating call or something, or that's just like a standard noise that they make, but that is just a very eerie sound that they picked, and I absolutely love that sound that the ants use. It does kind of get a little, it kind of wears its welcome out towards the end because it's literally the only noise the ants make. Um, but yeah, no, it's
But yeah.
very spooky. You don't really know what it is because it sounds otherworldly. It just has a very unnatural sound to it, but at the same time, it does sound like it would, like it's a natural sound, but it's not something that you would like hear in a desert or something like that, and it could be very mistaken for the wind or like a piece of machinery not working, or it just has a lot of different explanations on what it could be than what it actually is, which I think makes it creepier because there's so much mystery to it of there's multiple explanations on what it could be, but no one knows for sure.
Yeah, and I I agree that it definitely kind of loses the effect, the fear effect by the end, because obviously by this point we know what it is
Yeah.
and we're seeing the ants. It's only creepy in the beginning, like the first act when we don't know what this thing is. And it's I just did love that scene when we first see the ants. So
Yes.
they're out they're out and they're just the way Pat is sitting and the camera is positioned, and I'm like, "Oh, so we're about to see the ants or what? You're about to
Yeah,
see the
yeah.
monster," and then it just comes out.
It's
It's
very
that
clearly,
angle.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's very clearly like, okay, something's gonna show up because they're leaving a lot of open space for the camera where they're pointing at nothing. Something's gonna show up here, and they're already making the noise of what we know is supposed to be what's killing everyone because it killed Ben's partner. So something's gonna show up here, and I remember thinking that when I first watched this in like middle school, and it's like, okay, something's gonna show up. I Because at that point I didn't know what it was, um, but it was just like, oh, this is gonna be exciting. Because at that point I like fell in love with that movie by that point
Yeah.
because it was just they 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 focused a lot on less is more by that point, and it definitely kind of had like a similar thing to Jaws of we think it could be this, but we don't know. But I mean, whereas in Jaws, like it's very clear, like okay, this is a shark. We just don't know how big it is, and then we get the reveal like halfway through the movie of like, okay, that's how big it is. That is a scary looking shark. I don't want to mess with this. Whereas in this movie, we don't see the ants until I want to say like roughly like what you like 30 minutes in.
Yeah.
Like it's like a
I yeah.
significant chunk of this movie. You don't see the ants until they want you to see it.
Yeah, and pretty early on I realized this is what they wanted the 1998 Godzilla to be. That sense of we're gonna not share what we. I mean,
Oh,
you
okay.
obviously know it's Godzilla, but in terms of trying not to share with the characters what this is, and realizing like try the that aspect of it, I realized this is how they were viewing it. And then even like the end, like they're searching, it does, like you're saying, how methodical it is, and they're trying to base this off of what they know of ants and how there's a queen ant, she will fly off and she will lay eggs, and we got to find where she is, where she's laid her eggs, and that kind of, that same
Yeah.
Godzilla had that same element of there's
I don't think I
eggs
ever made the
somewhere.
connection of that.
I
I that no
I
that
don't know,
no
but
no
it
I
was.
completely agree with you. I'm just like kind of surprised I didn't think of that because I'm usually the one who thinks about Godzilla all the time.
I thought of it right away. I in the fact that yeah, we don't know what this is, and that's the mystery, the beginning, the mystery, and the science attempting less, but more in this, less in Godzilla,
Yeah,
of the scientific aspect of trying to figure out what to do next.
yeah,
Because ants are, yeah, I mean, whether an ant is like its normal size or a giant mutant, it is still an ant and going to do what an ant does.
yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
and they kind of explain in the movie like the only like difference in the ants when they eventually find the nest and like gas it with cyanide and they discover the egg chamber. The only difference that they show was that the ants don't. when the ants hatch out of their eggs, they don't go through like the larval stage. They just grow into uh, they're basically just born as an ant and then they eventually grow in size. That's the only difference in like the ant like biology that they say in the movie, and they say that pretty quickly, but it doesn't really seem like it's that big of a uh, detail to focus on, because for the most part you're not really dealing with the eggs. Just like the problem is the actual ants themselves, not the baby ants, because we never really see the baby ants. We do only see like a few like unhatched eggs, which they just burn immediately. And I kind of want to point out the scene where they first like go into the egg chamber after they've gassed it. There's just like a bit of like residual gas like around their feet, giving like this really like spooky like fog effect, which I really liked. But when they went into the egg chamber, it reminded me so much of the first Aliens when they find all the eggs. Uh, and I want to say like that's kind of like an homage to them, but it definitely, I felt like this movie had a lot more influence in pop culture than people realize, because both of those scenes, taken out of context, are extremely similar. Like they're even like destroying them with flamethrowers and machine guns, like in the end of the second Alien movie. It was just very interesting, and I really enjoyed it of how this movie was so unintentionally influential for its time that people don't seem to realize where this originated from.
Yeah. I can definitely see that. It was in terms of as far as, again, I don't watch a ton of
Horror,
monster movies and
yeah.
horror, but like as far as this goes, it is very, everything is very planned out and very organized in how they're dealing with this problem, as opposed to just running around screaming in terror.
Yeah,
And I did I did like that a lot. Something though that I did notice, I don't know, you might agree, you might disagree. I felt the characters, I did like the characters, but I wasn't really given any reason other than things they were doing. Like, Peterson's last act was to save two
the
kids
yeah
from
the
the ants, then, and he died in the process. Like, I wasn't given any, we weren't given any reason to hate them, which was fine, but I did kind of feel that the characters came off to me a little two-dimensional, especially when characters would die. It seemed like they just kind of moved forward. There
yeah
wasn't any drama over it. And not that I would expect like a big overly like sappy like goodbye, but it just seemed like when Peterson's partner dies, there didn't really seem to be much repercussion other than the fact that, you know, Graham starts working with him.
yeah
It just seemed like he just moved on, and I'm like, I thought there was going to be more of like, he hasn't come back yet, or I haven't gone, we what, like some realizing that, oh, he was killed by the ants. They just kind of, I mean, I was knowing he had to figure. Obviously, he knew
yeah
that's what happened, but it never really showed that side. It didn't. The characters weren't as uh
fleshed out.
emotional and fleshed out. Yeah,
Yeah, that I am gonna have to agree with you on that. That is kind of one of the flaws with movies like this, is that they have to focus a lot more attention to the situation and the monsters, and have to explain to the audience as well as various like characters in the movie, like such as like all the politicians when they're giving like that slideshow, the actual gravity of the situation, that it does kind of lack on character development, which I think is also part of the reason why the like relationship between Pat and Bob wasn't really fleshed out as much, because they didn't have time to focus on it. So a lot of movies kind of fell into that kind of same formula as this movie, because it's pretty much set like the standard for like nuclear monsters and like giant bug monsters from like the 50s and onwards, of focusing on the situation at hand and the monster, and kind of leaving the characters to sideline, but only giving them enough characters to kind of give them like their name, a brief description about themselves, and their motivation. And outside of that, they're not really given much personality outside of that.
Yeah, it was everything was just like so methodical that the character development wasn't required or
Yeah,
necessary because it's irrelevant to the plot,
I did.
which
I will have to disagree with you for one character. I felt like Dr. Medford, he was probably the most fleshed out character, because there were times where he was like really giddy and excited, but then he was also really like serious, and like wasn't telling like Graham or Peterson what his thesis was, because he kept saying like, I hope I'm wrong, and I don't want to tell you guys because I don't want to intentionally start a panic. But if
yeah, I
this
can
is
agree with
true,
that.
this is the scientific discovery of the century. And he's
Yeah.
both excited, and he's also like really like cautious about it. And I just really like that, because he does kind of have like several moments where he is kind of childlike and stubborn, of like not wanting to follow the rules on the helicopter like PA system, or him like not using the goggles and just being kind of like aloof and forgetful.
Yeah.
But being very like dedicated to his job, to the point where like, all right, I'm not going to be like much of a people person. I'm going to leave that to my daughter to kind of pick up my mess if I kind of do or say something that I probably shouldn't be doing or saying.
Yeah, and no, I agree about I agree with that. Like he was definitely the most fleshed out. It was more Peterson and Graham, like
Yeah,
when especially when yeah, so when Peterson's partner died and when Peterson died, I thought there would have been some a little bit more drama, or well with his partner that could have just been added to the mystery, but with uh Peterson it could have been like
a
he gave
personal thing.
yeah, like no they don't him and Pat and uh Graham don't know each other that well, but they have worked together for I know what's the timeline of this movie? It's at least a couple weeks.
It's a couple weeks, but they kind of say like, oh, this nest is probably like several months old, and they never establish like when the two queen ants left. The queen ant that was on the ship, which I really like that scene, because it does kind of follow the example of less is more. They only show one scene where the ants are briefly attacking some of the sailors as they're sending out an SOS signal, and then it's said in like a debriefing, like the next scene later, it's like, all right, the ship has been sunk. We've only rescued two survivors, and the only people who know about this event are the people in this room, and the people on the SS Menford who sunk the SS Viking. Um, but yeah, they never fully establish a solid timeline of when the second queen ant escaped and left to establish her colony in the spillways in LA, because the only person who's telling them that he's seen the ants is like an alcoholic patient who said he's seen them for a long time, and he's been there for 5 months. So we don't know if he's seen them for the entire 5 months that he's been there, or he's only seen them
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah, and I actually do really love though it is a little open ended at the end because they so Medford concludes that this is because of the radiation from the like practice atomic bomb strikes about 9 years before.
Yes.
And so that fits into that timeline. And at the very end, they're like, it's over. And he's like, well, I mean, as far as we know,
Yeah.
because the fact that this happened, it could have happened to other animals. There could be more ants that we just haven't, we don't know as far as we know, it's done, but there's also no way to know for sure
Yeah. And
because what happened out there.
and that's literally like that one sentence of dialogue at the end of this movie, like that brief exchange at like the very end of the movie, is one of the reasons why I picked this movie for this episode, because it set the standard and more or less left it open ended for anyone and everyone to make movies that kind of fit within this category of when man entered the atomic age, we have messed with nature and opened a door that no one knows is on the other side. The possibilities are endless. We just hope that we are able to face those dangers when we are confronted with them, or something along those lines. But he says that with like, yes, I'm happy that we were able to destroy the ants in time. We were able to prevent all the nests from reaching full maturity and causing devastation that would wipe us out within a year. But he does leave us with that warning and kind of falls into like that whole cautionary tale that this movie kind of gives off, that we don't know we don't know the full dangers of a atomic testing that we've done. We don't know the dangers of the nuclear radiation because it was brand new at the time. It's only been around for, I don't know, 9, 10 years at that time.
Yeah.
So it definitely kind of helped inspire various directors to kind of create their own take on that. It's like, because after this movie, there was a huge surge of giant monster movies, and especially giant bug movies. Like we had the Black Scorpion, Tarantula, the Deadly Mantis, and then it jumped species to uh, there was Godzilla and and that kind of created like a whole like prehistoric like resurgence of dinosaurs showing up, being awakened from their centuries long slumber by the atomic radiation because it was similar to how the atmosphere of Earth was millions of years ago. And it just kind of steamrolled and snowballed into this whole cultural thing that the entire decade was just saturated with monster movies that more or less followed the similar plot or reasoning of nuclear radiation either woke up or created this unspeakable horror that we now have to deal with.
Yeah. Um it it's definitely, I would say this is a really good, I think anyone can watch this. I think it's a really good like I can't, I mean I know it is technically a horror film, but it,
Yeah.
for me when it comes to horror, I there's other things that I look for because I don't want the scare to be like I can't sleep. I want it to be more part of like it's fun and it makes it entertaining. So I, something about this that I loved is that this kind of also ties in with like a mystery. Like they're trying to figure out, because they're trying to figure out, okay, who is this girl? Where did she come from? Okay, here's where she come from. Who are these people? Why are they here? And then as they Graham and Peterson are following a lead, they end up in Los Angeles trying to track down um, who was it? It was like it was a man and his two sons, and he often he takes them out to go
Yeah,
do stuff.
yeah, it was they found there's this woman there who's like reported her husband and her husband and her two sons missing because they didn't come home that day. He missed his shift for work and he's only takes his kids out for like a couple hours on Sunday because his work is like so busy that he has no time to spend time with them otherwise. And uh so they literally only kind of stumble upon these leads by accident through various like reportings that it's like, okay, we're gonna focus on like missing persons, unsolved mysteries, and they have like that bulletin that like military intelligence is like scanning like the entire country for, of like, all right, if anyone reports like anything within this category, like send it to us immediately, and we'll verify whether or not if it's an actual lead or if it's just some ramblings of an insane person. Because they do find like a crop duster or someone who
Yeah,
had to like maneuver around one of the Queen Anne's and her mates, and he gets locked in a mental asylum and basically is like, no, I know I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. I saw like 3 UFOs that were shaped like ants, and of course, like our heroes like believe him. But when they leave, it's like, all right, our government would appreciate if he is kept locked up because he could be a potential danger to himself and the general public. Make sure that no one comes in to see him or talks to him. We'll let you know when he's better and you can release him. Because the doctor initially is like, oh, yeah, I was actually going to release him. This is clearly just a stupid publicity stunt. There's nothing wrong with him. It's like, no, there is something wrong with him. And the government, like he emphasizes the government would appreciate it if he gets take the proper treatment he deserves and we'll let you know when he's better. I
Yeah.
really liked that kind of like shady, kind of like Men in Black kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So actually, you want to bring out the guy, the crop duster guy, is Fez
Hmm.
Parker, who I think it was because of this movie, but he eventually goes on to star in Disney's Davy Crockett, and
Oh, he
yeah,
did.
I think it was because of this movie, or it was I think like that's what it was something I read. I don't remember because I
Oh,
watched it a few
yeah,
nights
no,
ago. So
yeah. When I'm looking that up right now. When Walt was looking for an actor to play the part of Davy Crockett, he screened the sci-fi movie Them and discovered Fez Parker in the process.
yeah, this movie is so we talked about this a little before, but this movie is just filled with people that will
Ended up doing bigger and better
yeah,
things
like
afterward.
a lot of them. So like Fez Parker, Leonard Nimoy, uh I don't the actors that played Graham Peterson, like it's kind of it's
Yeah,
almost kind of like funny, like oh, huh, you're gonna be in
yeah.
this.
Well, horror is actually like as I kind of said before, horror is like a really easy movie to or is a really easy genre to make. To make it's just very difficult to make a good horror movie,
Yeah,
but when it's done, it pays off, and that's actually how like a lot of people get their start. Because as I said before, like Jennifer Aniston, George Clooney, Leonardo DiCaprio, like all of their first movies, or like one of their first movies, was in horror. So it is a really good stepping stone to kind of get into the industry, because it's a good way to show off your acting chops and kind of add something to your resume. Because almost everybody has like a really crappy horror movie in their IMDb page. Like
yeah,
almost everybody. It is impossible to avoid a horror movie, especially a bad horror movie.
yeah.
Um, and it is just really interesting that this was such a big milestone, both for like the subgenre of giant bug monster movies and monster movies at the time, and kind of catapult the career of all these people like James Arnaz, Robert Graham, like went off to do Gunsmoke for 20 years after this movie. And Fez Parker, Leonard Nimoy, James Whitmore ended up doing a bunch more stuff. Edmund Gunn, Doctor Medford ended up doing Miracle on 34th Street. I don't know if that
I
was
think that
before or
was
after, but
before.
he
I
was.
think that was before.
Oh, it was
I think it was
before.
the
Okay, but
40s.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah. Anyway, like everyone was either like well known or ended up becoming well known through interactions in this movie and the connections that they made because of this movie.
Yeah. Um but yeah, and I actually want to talk more about that scene that with the crop duster scene. He
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so yeah, I agree. There was kind of that Men in Black like thing. It's not like
Keep it on the down
you're
low.
you don't know what you're dealing with, so we got to because yeah, like I mean, even in Men in Black, there's like a line about how people are a person is smart, but people are dangerous, dumb, and
Dumb.
panicky.
Yeah, dumb. Yeah,
And I and the thing is because yeah Fez Parker even says to them like okay I'm because he says like oh I know you guys don't believe me and Pat's like actually we do believe you and he's like oh do you think you guys can like put in a word get me out of here and they're like oh yeah totally and the second they see the doctor like oh yeah keep him locked in there because I understand they don't trust that he won't keep it a secret and
yeah,
but I kind of thought right there because yeah there is a aspect of it that comes off a little shady and I kind of thought that would have been interesting it would have been interesting if any of one like, if even one of the characters was like kind of like against
against
that,
that.
or like he's locked in a mental institution. Like, can't we, like, I don't know if there was some kind of friction. So yeah, there are a lot of parts in this movie that I just feel like there could have been more, a little bit more conflict. There could have been a little more drama, and it just kind of was, because it was just so orderly and methodical and just we following everything step by step. There just wasn't room for any of that. And
Yeah,
yeah,
the yeah, they're like there were even like scenes where like, oh, we're gonna like when they find the nest in the Los Angeles spillway, is like, all right, so we can flood this with gas and we can burn anything through. It's like, no, we can't do that. There are still like the two kids unaccounted for, and they could be in the nest. And it's like, you want to risk the safety of the entire city just to find two children? It's like, well, you can go ask their mother. She's right over there. It's like, oh, I see what you mean. All right, well, we won't do that. And like that's the end of that.
yeah,
So it's like I felt like that could have been like way more room for like confrontation, or like some like a little bit more drama on like the like our leads, and like that one like lieutenant, and like have like the mom slap him for even suggesting an
yeah,
idea, just to add like a little bit more drama and like more gravity to the situation of, this isn't just like a search and destroy mission, this is a search and rescue as well.
yeah. And I agree. This is why I feel like the first act I really enjoyed, just because it was so mysterious and we don't know. The unknown is the driving force, and is what is scary. Whereas in
Absolutely.
the final act, the we now know, we have all the information, and the realization of, they find a model plane, and they check and they realize it does belong to one of the kids, and it's the same one, and it's not at the house.
Yeah,
It has to be them.
and they and they also discovered like tire tracks, and it's like, oh, right, this matches what's his face's car, so like they were definitely here.
And that realization of, okay, let's say the dad tried to protect them and he dies, but where do the kids go? And they realize, oh my god, they went into the tunnel. So I just kind of, then yeah, by this point we have all the information, and now it's just, we got to use this to solve it. And I love, and they
Yeah,
all, it's, there is some tension there is definitely tension by this point. And
yeah.
when by that point, honestly, when they're going in the tunnels and he's like crawling through, I'm like, it's becoming kind of like Chamber of Secrets here. And actually, there were a couple, because this was in LA at this point. They're in that I don't know, what do you call that, like where the tunnel is, like, I'm like, is that the,
Like the actual like riverbed.
yeah, I was like, is this the same spot from like that ending part in Greece? Like the
Oh yeah, it
driving
is.
stuff. I was
That
like,
that is like that scene where they filmed it. They used that for hundreds of movies later on, like
I
from
think,
Grease to Transformers to Drive, just to name a few.
I'm just thinking, I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if Chinatown was one of them. I don't know. It's because it's got that LA look, and that's shot in LA, but
Probably like
it's that same
if you
spot it's in every it's in every movie
it,
that's in LA. Yeah.
if you're if you're filming in LA, it's basically like standard practice that you have to film in that riverbed at some point during your movie.
Even if it doesn't call for it.
Nope, not even a little bit. It's
Yeah.
like, you need a shreddy drug deal under the bridge over there. You need a car race? All right, we'll clear this thing out.
Um but yeah, and I just I the when they crawling through, he finds the kids, and one of them just looks so like
Oh, like
unresponsive, like the,
one of the kids just seems like a really bad actor in my opinion.
oh, is it
He
the one that
just
didn't
not.
respond?
Yeah, like I don't know
Yeah.
if it was like if this kid was supposed to be in shock, but like the other kid is like shit his pants scared. It's like, all right, this kid's on to it, and this kid like no emotion whatsoever. Like he doesn't look like he's in shock. He just seems like uninterested that he's even here.
Yeah, I was like, he could be, yeah, he does. I'm like, is he in, I thought the same thing. I kind of looked at it more like shock, but I did notice that one looked genuinely terrified and one
Yeah,
didn't. And so the ants, apparently, so you never see more than 3 ants at a
yeah,
time.
because they only made
They only
three.
made 3. And so but like I mean, that's what they're looking at though, right? It's not like those were actually there. It's, I mean, it's the 50s,
Yeah,
so
no,
it's
those are
not.
actually there. So I did hear from like conflicting like reports that they did make a fourth ant that was just the front half, and then they had multiple like puppeteers and like engineers like operating like the individual like antennae and like the mandibles and like all the other things, because the other ants, when it's like the full body ones, they're not as mobile. It's just like their like legs are moving and like their mandibles, and like that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But apparently they did have like a couple or like one or two of just like the front half, because there were a few times where you only see like the front half of the ant. Like when you first see it, it's just like the front half, and then you don't see it until like it's dead. um but yeah, that did surprise me that they only had three ants for this movie, because almost all of them get hit with a flamethrower. So it's like, wait, did they just extinguish that super quickly and repaired it, or did they have like body doubles for the ants that they could torch?
Yeah.
Because almost every single one of these ants gets hit with a flamethrower at some point in this movie. Like
Yeah.
a few of them like get shot and are like gas. Like, okay, well, we can use that for the next thing when they get hit with a flamethrower. But you see them get hit with a flamethrower more than three times throughout this movie. It's like, they must have extinguished that really quickly, or they are really good at building these fake ants.
I didn't even think about it. I was just like, there were there was a time when there was one, and there was a time when there was more. I, of course, yes, it would have been way more terrifying if there was like tens, like hundreds, but obviously because these were made and this was a lot of this was practical.
Oh, like
That's
this is 100% practical.
yeah. So I mean, that would have been very not impossible, just but
Yeah.
pricey. And I get why it's three. I didn't think about it until I read that, and I was like, okay,
Yeah, the only thing that I feel like could have like definitely like made that scarier in terms of like the like huge scale of the ants. Like you do see like a lot of like the dead ants like when they're going through the first nest after it's gassed. Which is really creepy because you do get to see like a fairly large scale of what these ants are capable of, like how big the tunnels are, how many dead ants there are, and how many eggs there are, which I really enjoyed. But the only way I feel like that movie could have pulled it off of actually seeing like how many live ants there were would be if they did some kind of like stop motion effect, like the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which came out the year before it, because that would have definitely had been possible. Because I know they did something similar like that on Voyage to the Moon or something like that, or the Mysterious Island, which had various giant bugs and insects and animals. So it would have been possible. I just feel like it would have added a lot more production time to the actual process of making the movie, and probably would have been extremely time consuming and pricey, especially if they had Ray Harryhausen, who was basically like the master of that.
yeah,
But for what it was, I very much enjoy it. I love the practical effects in this movie, and the way that this movie is carried out, I feel like is how it would have been carried out in real life. I feel like there would have been a little bit more tension and conflict, especially between
the
Peterson and
characters.
the government,
Yeah,
because he's just like a beat cop from New Mexico, and for some reason they drag him along throughout this entire process. Like he's wearing like a military uniform at one point. They're having him fire bazookas and flamethrowers. Like, okay, why is this beat cop from New Mexico being brought through all this, including like these like top secret like military briefings in Washington D.C.? Like
yeah,
I get he was like the first like responder throughout like this case, but like why is he so heavily involved? Like I understand why like the FBI agents here and like the doctors are here because like they're the experts and he's like the federal agent like in charge of this, but why is this random beat cop from New Mexico being brought along as well? Like I guess he can be like a sort of like consultant, but like he's like leading the investigation along with Graham.
yeah. Because I mean, again, he's just a cop, and everyone else is way higher up than him. And
Yeah,
if this was made today or at a different time, there would have been more conflict. They would have tried to have keep him out, and he would have forced his way in. Like there are definitely, like I said, there are definitely parts where you can see where the conflict could be. And
yeah,
I yeah, I think as an audience member, I think I kind of thought that a little bit of that too. I think as an audience member, you kind of just accept he was there, so they're letting him in. But also, I think there's a difference between, because he said they asked him at a meeting like, "Do your superior officers know?" And he said no, and because he's like, "I was told for total secrecy and not to disclose
Yeah,
anything." So I think if he hadn't see, it's one thing of him just being on the scene, because he did go before they had let Washington know, because he was one of the first people to actually see giant ants. He
yeah,
It makes sense. Like, okay, well, we don't want, we can't let, they're trying so hard to not let this information out, that I can understand. Like, I mean, he's already was dealing with it. Let's just keep him with us. There's really no,
so
you
so
know,
so okay, I kind of see where you're coming from. So they basically like kept him close to make sure that he didn't spill the beans.
well, not just that. I mean, that makes sense. Not just that, but I think he would have wanted to have joined this like task force anyway. I mean, like, he was with uh both both the Dr. Medfords and Graham when they came across and realized, oh, it's a giant ant, and then they let Washington know. If they had known it was a giant ant before he knew, they probably wouldn't have him come along the entire time. But because he
Yeah,
already knew, it didn't really wouldn't have really done anything to keep him
yeah,
out.
that makes sense. So he basically just he was in the right place at the right time, and it was just way more convenient to keep him in than rather than push him out.
Yeah, because yeah, like we said, it was just the
Okay.
FBI involved at the time, and then Washington got involved once they knew what they were dealing with. But at the time, it was just FBI and a cop teaming up, and a couple.
Yeah, they were just investigating like the disappearance of a coincidental FBI agent who was on vacation with his family.
Yeah, so
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Yeah.
yeah, it's not, and yeah, it's so I don't think it's weird that he's there, but I feel like based on his status, they probably, I don't know. I could totally see like them saying like, "Oh, you're not needed anymore," and then like, uh, Pat or Graham are like trying to convince, "No, no, we need him." Like, and they did, because he's the one that found the kids, and ants are coming, and he pushes them through, and so I
Yeah, he a selfless hero. He sacrifices himself to save the kids, and then he dies like 5 minutes before the movie ends.
and no one really, I mean, no one really cared. They like
I
killed
mean,
the ant and then just kind of moved
like
on.
like Robert like shows up and like like medic, and then he like turns to the guy who said it and is like he shakes his head because it's like it's too late. He's already dead.
Yeah, I mean, you would.
It's like I think they were kind of more or less going along the lines like there's no time to mourn. We got to finish the mission.
Yeah, but there's still kind of, and without even saying that, there could have been that, like, you know, subtext. I didn't really
Yeah,
feel. I figured that's what it was, but there
yeah.
wasn't a moment that would imply that.
Yeah, they definitely took the less is more kind of approach a little bit too far at times, and I feel like that was one of the times where it's like, okay, I feel like this needs to be addressed. He was the lead character of like one of the leads of this movie, and he died during the climax, and there's still 5 minutes left of this movie. I feel like this should somewhat be addressed at least in a line of dialogue, but he literally just kind of like has like this quiet acknowledgement with the soldier like next to him is like of the silent exchange of like don't bother calling the medic, he's already dead. It's like at least say that rather than like that quiet exchange of like you shaking your head no to the soldier calling for a medic.
I mean,
And also I
if
really
yeah.
sorry, it was just also really funny as when Ben died he gave off a Wilhelm scream. I
Oh
just
my
thought that was
god.
funny.
Yeah. So wait, before that, like, if like the head shake was more dramatic, and there was like a dramatic like score, if there was still again that subtext of he's dead, I'm upset, but we can't, there's nothing to do about it, let's keep
Yeah,
going.
like even just like a brief like musical cue of just like some like somber music before like ramp back up to the firefight between the military and the ants.
Yeah, like there needed to be the they kind of just quickly moved on, and that I thought
Yeah.
was kind of frustrating. But
Well, I mean, I feel like they kind of had to because
yes, they're
like
right there.
for a movie at this time, like this is a long movie for the time. This was like well over 90 minutes. Um, and so yeah, I felt like the entire climax was kind of rushed because the
Yeah,
movie went at a very like I guess I don't want to say slow pace because it did keep me interested and keep me invested throughout the entire movie, but it did kind of get to a point where like, all right, we need to finish this movie now. So like the entire climax is like, I don't know, 12 minutes. Like that's a really like fast climax. And as soon as like the queen ants are dead, there's like one sentence said at the very end, and then the movie's over.
yeah. I kind of thought the second act was honestly for me at the slowest because it was just them following procedure and finding potential witnesses and figure like it
And
was
yeah, chasing leads and all that.
it
Yeah.
to me that was kind of the most boring part of the movie. But once they kind of but it was like, oh, they find this which leads to this which leads to this, and once they find like the drunk guy who probably was seeing these giant ants and then led them here, like it
Yeah.
definitely, obviously it was, I think the beginning was my favorite. I thought the ending was great. The middle was just kind of slow, and I think that would have been a little more interesting if the characters were more
More
fleshed out.
conflict. Yeah.
um
Yeah. No, I completely agree. But for what it
yeah,
is, this is 100% a solid movie. It's a great like monster movie, and it's a great way to kind of delve into this like more or less this subgenre that kind of created the whole craze of like the monster movies and all of that.
yeah. But we gotta
Um,
talk about that Wilhelm scream because it happened several times, and it's I
throughout the
so,
climax.
not even just the climax. I heard it a couple of times, definitely in the climax, but I heard it a couple times throughout the movie. Like, and I, I mean, the thing about a Wilhelm scream, if it happens like once in a movie, and I know there's like that compilation video on YouTube of all
Of every
every
Wilhelm scream.
yeah, and I think I just that one's different because that one's becoming like it's like a cliche and like a classic and it's in
Yeah.
so many things. But I personally just there's certain like sound effects or like human sound effects that I feel like I've heard so many times that it's honestly just
Yeah.
becoming like ugh. Like a Wilhelm scream's almost, I feel like it's in a category of its own just because it's like almost funny by this point,
Yeah,
hearing it and
like that
everything.
and the I think it's called like the Howie scream where it's like yeah, like that one.
Uh
I
I think
like
yeah.
like I remember someone like did an edit of like replacing like the TIE fighter sounds with the Howie scream, and it fit like way too perfectly, and it just makes me laugh way too much.
There is this like these like baby cries. I think there's like one or two, there's like two I think I've heard multiple times. And I know like where I've originally heard them, but then whenever I hear them in anything else, I'm like it's just the same baby cry
Oh
over and
yeah,
over. There's
no,
two
yeah,
particular
no,
ones that I've heard. The one in like the baby sounds. I think there's like at least two different ones that I've heard a couple times in Hercules, the very beginning when he's a baby, and the other one is when Shrek and Fiona arrive in Far Far Away, and everybody's in like shock that they're ogres, and it's quiet, and you just hear this baby crying. That's that other one that I hear all the time.
okay.
Like,
It's been a while since I've seen either of those
yeah,
movies, but I feel like I know what you're talking about. But before we kind of go off on another tangent,
yeah.
but like, what are your final thoughts on this movie?
Um, I enjoyed it. I think it's, yeah, I agree for what it is. It is really well done. I think the story is really interesting. It's not complete. It's not like absurd as you would think with giant ants, and even like some movies today where you got like just giant animal whatever, they come off ridiculous or they're major B movies and they're just you know
Yeah,
but
they're just made to get a
yeah,
paycheck.
but I did think this was entertaining. It was a fun movie. I do think this is a movie I would kind of say anyone could watch. Like last time, we were pretty adamant about Nosferatu definitely not being for everyone, and this, I I definitely, if you're into, especially if you're into horror or um, any kind of monster movies, I definitely would recommend it. It's not that scary. It is more of like a mystery and like following leads as opposed to it being like, horror, because they only deal with the ants. They deal with them a couple times in the beginning and then the ending. They don't really deal with them a lot in the middle of the movie. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, I definitely I liked it. It was really enjoyable, and it was
yeah.
fun.
Um, I 100% agree with that. I absolutely love this movie. I've pretty much I fell in love with it within like the first like 20 minutes when I watched this in like middle school. I was like probably like 12 or 13 at the time. Um, and yeah, I've watched this multiple times since. I literally like had to wait for my dad because he'd really wanted to watch this as well when I told him we were doing this episode. Um, so it definitely does have like a soft spot for me as well. Um, but it is just a really solid movie. And yeah, if you're just like a casual like creature feature kind of guy that just watches movies for like great creature effects, this is a great one to kind of get into because it's all practical because it's 1954. They didn't really have technology outside of claymation, stop motion animation to do something like this. Um, it's really fun. It's got a really engaging story. The characters are really fun to get to know when you do get to know them. And it just this movie was very influential and it's referenced throughout popular media like every once in a while. Like I think like my favorite example of this being referenced is in the video game Fallout 3. There is a side quest where you have to deal with giant mutated fire ants,
Oh,
and the title of the mission is called Those, and you come across this child running at you just screaming those, just like in the in this movie where like little girl comes out of her shock, she's just screaming them over and over
oh
again.
yeah, we didn't say
um
that. That's why it's called them, because they get her out of
yes,
her trance,
trance.
and she's just like screaming them, which I think is an
Yeah,
interesting,
but
like, not like they're coming or it's them, but just them, and I kind of was wondering, like,
yeah,
has she dealt with them before? Is that what she was screaming
yeah.
when, like, she before she went into her shock?
I just really like the
Oh,
title
yeah, no,
too.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
them because it's like, well, what are them? Like, who is them? Like, it's just them exclamation point, and it's just very. I feel like it kind of gives off like a little bit of mystery as well, just in the title, which kind of adds to it because you don't know who or what
yeah.
them is. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the movie. Definitely give it a watch. Um, and yeah, so in the meantime, like, share, subscribe, give us a recommendation on Facebook, follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Facebook. What else am I missing here, Sam?
Oh, Stitcher.
Oh,
Yeah.
Stitcher. Yeah, I keep forgetting about that one. So yeah, definitely give us a recommendation, and we will continue on with our history of horror later on throughout the rest of this month. I'm really excited. Definitely leave some comments and suggestions on other movies you want us to do as well. And in the meantime, I'm Kevin
I'm
Tracy.
Samantha Tomlinson, and this has been Movie Reel.
Goodbye, everyone.